My wife and I lived in Cincinnati, Ohio in 2019, and one night around Christmas we went to the Cincinnati Pops. It's the Cincinnati Orchestra. It's a wonderful orchestra. We had a wonderful time. And there was a Broadway star who was touring at that time, and she just gave an incredible concert. It was really amazing. She's a well-known name. She's been big in a couple huge shows over the last couple of years. Just did an amazing job on an incredible concert. It really revealed also she's a very faithful person. It was really, really cool to just hear her sing and hear her story. We were totally blown away. There was a moment in the concert where she was just sharing a little bit personally about her own life and some of the winding story that she's had, and expressing gratitude for God for answering all these sorts of prayers in her life. And in particular, she had questions around family and questions around a performance career, and had dreams and desires around both of those things that at times she felt like, I don't know how this is ever going to happen for me. But she was just sharing that they did happen for her. She got the family that she wanted, and she ended up performing at the level that she wanted. And she was just saying all of this in the context of just praising God and expressing gratitude for God. But at one moment she had a line where she said, and all these things happened, I can't believe that I got everything I ever wanted. And that just stuck out to me. I mean, on the one hand, I was like, I love seeing someone else in front of other people praising God for the way that He's been present in their lives, right? That's amazing. And God's been present in your life. There have been things that you've wanted, and things that you've set out to do, where God has been present and He's answered prayer. And at the same time, that line, somehow at the same time, that like getting everything that we want somehow also doesn't guarantee that we're going to be happy. Because we've also seen that in our lives at the same time, right? We've really pined after something and we got it. And then like a year later, we're like, okay, I guess I just sort of reached that mark on the journey, but now I'm unhappy about this thing or that thing all over again, right? Or we see it in other people's lives. Sometimes it's much easier to see it in the lives of other people. We're like, you have all sorts of wonderful things. Life really worked out for you. Why are you so upset? Like, we can see that so clearly in the lives of other people. We want things so badly. And when we don't get them, they're sources of profound grief and pain. And at the same time, we sort of have this sense that we can't quite get rid of. That getting everything that we want also is the key to living a happy and fulfilled life. Billie Eilish had a song called Everything I Wanted, where she opened the song with these lyrics. She said, I had a dream. I got everything I wanted. Not what you think. And if I'm being honest, it might have been a nightmare to anyone who might care. Are our lives ruined if we don't get that thing we wanted? This is the question that we're going to be looking at today. We're walking through a sermon series through Paul's epistle to the Galatians. We're just going through verse by verse every week, opening up the book, reading the next verses, and seeing what God has to say to us in our lives. We're going to be in Galatians chapter 4 today. So, we're about to sort of swing into another section of the book. Chapter 6 chapters long, so we're sort of at that halfway point. If you've missed any other sermons, you can find audio recordings and stuff online. There's lots of good context there. The thing that you need to know in order to jump into the text of Galatians today is that Paul is writing, the Apostle Paul's writing in the first century to churches in the Roman province of Galatia, which is modern-day Turkey. He's writing to them because they've come under the influence of a teaching that is telling them that in order for their lives to be meaningful, in order for their life with God to be meaningful, they have to get certain external things right. Certain external things from a religious sense and a cultural sense, they have to get those things right, and even good things as a result of them have to come to pass. Otherwise, their life with God is not going to be satisfying or meaningful. And Paul thinks that this teaching is so opposed to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and he's writing to them this letter to get them out from under the influence of this teaching. Today we're reading Galatians chapter 4, verses 1 to 7. I'll read the text aloud and encourage you to open up a Bible or pull the text up on some sort of a device so we can reference it as we go. So we can really be like learning how to read the Bible together and growing our confidence to engage with the Bible. Because you need to be able to engage with the Bible on your own. It's the primary way that you know that God's voice can come to you in a sure and settled way. You just open up the Bible, you're like, God's speaking to me, and you learn in church as we engage with the text together how to do that on your own. So open up your Bible, pull out a device, Galatians chapter 4, verses 1 to 7. I'll read the text aloud. This is what it says. I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir in God. Our lives are full of things that we want but don't yet have. Which, if you think about it, it sounds kind of oxymoronic, but I think I'm going to defend it. Our lives are actually full of things that we want but don't yet have. We all have dreams and desires. We all have things that we want desperately in life. An intimate relationship, children, a satisfying career and work that we do and that we love, status, just a sense of settledness and good feeling and peace in ourselves. We all have these things that are driving forces that we're working towards in our life over and over and over again. And some things we get. Some things seem to come easily. Even if we have to work at certain things, we still find that we pursue them and we achieve them or we get them and we're grateful for those things. But some of those things seem to chronically elude us. And it can be particularly painful to watch other people get those things instead. And so desire begins to fill up our lives. And our lives become full, right? Our lives only have so much space in them. We only have so much space in our lives for different things, whether it's hopes or dreams or relationships or work or time. And our lives begin to get filled up by these desires that we have. Both by the feeling of desire and then the actions that we have as we pursue those desires. The plans that we make, the things that we do to bring them about. A desire that we chronically don't have fulfilled ends up taking space in our lives in a very particular way. Because not only do we sort of not have the thing that we desire, but in exchange for that, what we have instead is this new thing that's giving back to us, namely, the pain and the experience of not having the thing that we want. And that begins to fill up our life. Our life begins to be full of the experience and the pain and the grief of not getting this thing that I wanted. And it begins to grow and grow in our life. And we know this from experience. It pushes out space in our lives for other things. Because we're overwhelmed by this experience of, I don't have this thing that I wanted. That can produce itself in grief or anger or pain. Even things like hyperactivity, like we start doing more things in our present. We start spending our time out of a place of feeling alive with something that we wanted. And it shows us an insecurity that we feel about ourselves. And it grows and spreads in our lives. It can become an all-consuming thing. I was hanging out with some friends from church the other day, and we played this board game where you're sort of on a team at the beginning of the board game, but then halfway through the board game, someone in the game gets like special powers, and they sort of try to eliminate all the other people in the board game. And in the variation that we ended up playing, the special powers that the villains got was a blob. They got like a blob power. And so the board game is full of all these different rooms, and basically what you're trying to do as the heroes is you're trying to eliminate the blob before the blob spreads to all the rooms. And once the blob's in a room, you can't get it out. You just can't go into that room anymore. And so the blob just spreads and spreads and spreads, and room after room after room after room, and there's less and less places for you to go in the game, and all of a sudden you're just cramped in one little corner of the board, and finally we were playing, and I was on the heroes team trying really hard to win, and they rolled the dice, and the blob spreads to the final room, and we were all blob. The blob won, and the blob took over. It's very, very frustrating. But our lives in some ways can be like that, because we sort of have rooms in our hearts, and corridors in our souls, and certain things, they get into one room, and then they begin to spread to another room, and another room, and another room, and another room. And the experience of not having something we really wanted is kind of blob-like that in our hearts and in our souls. It starts in one place, and it spreads, and it spreads, and it spreads, and each time it goes into a new chamber of our heart, there isn't room in that place anymore for something else. For joy or hope or grace that might be coming from some other area of our life. want but don't yet have. A life governed by the things that we don't yet have is a life of enslavement or imprisonment. And this happens, according to Paul here in the text of Galatians chapter 4, in at least three ways. It happens in our identity, in our sense of ourselves, which then spreads to our beliefs, the things that we believe about ourselves in our life and think about ourselves. And finally, it spreads to our time and holds us captive in the ways that we use our time. It is possible to have an identity that ends up being defined by what we hope we will have in the future. It's possible for that to become an all-consuming thing in our identity. Paul uses two words to talk about this in Galatians chapter 4, verse 2. In verses 1 and 2, he says, I am an heir as long as he's a child, is no different from a slave, though he's the owner of everything. But he is under guardians and managers. These words, guardians and managers, Paul uses to describe what it's like to have one's identity set in relationship to something that we hope is coming in the future that we don't yet presently have. The first Greek word here is epitropos, and the second is oikonomos. You might remember from the sermon last week, Paul talked about being under a guardian, but the word he used last week in that context was actually slightly different. The word used to talk about guardianship last week was primarily to talk about a moral guardian or a disciplinarian. Whereas this word here, the epitropos, is really referring to a steward or a trustee. Someone who has been entrusted in a legal sense the execution of certain future things for a child who's not yet ready to receive them. Someone to whom something has been entrusted for or unto certain reasons for a child with finances or something like that. And the second word in oikonomos is an administrator or a supervisor or over a household or an estate. And what Paul is saying to the Galatians here is that he's saying when we are living under this place of having our identity set by this future thing that we think is coming someday, but that we don't yet have, we're actually living like a ward under a steward or a trustee, where our identity is actually defined by the fact that we think we'll have something in the future, but we don't currently have it right now. That can become an identity. I am the things I think I'll have in the future. And Paul says to the Galatians, they're in danger of having that govern their identity as well. This is the situation of a child who's waiting to come of age and hope that they'll receive certain things as they come of age. And it's possible for this to happen generally in the life of a person, that we become totally defined by what we hope is coming but don't yet have yet. This can happen in our career, in our relationships, and it begins to get in at the level of our souls. And we can begin to say things to ourselves like, I am what I don't have. Or even more painfully, when other people look at me, they see what I don't have. When other people look at me, they see all the things that I'm lacking. This can become an identity. And as it becomes an identity, it can become a belief system. A way that we think and believe and sort of self-dialogue about ourselves and our own lives. This is what Paul says when he's talking about these elemental spirits in Galatians chapter 4, verse 3. He says, in the same way, just like the child who's under a steward, whose identity is defined by what they hope they'll have in the future but don't yet have, we also, Paul says, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. This language here, the elemental principles or the elemental spirits of the world, is kind of mysterious. Paul uses it in a handful of places in the New Testament. There are a number of interpretive options of what Paul could be talking about here when he's talking about these elemental spirits or elemental principles. Paul uses this in Colossians chapter 2, verse 8 in a very similar way. This is what Colossians chapter 2, verse 8 says. He says, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the universe. Almost the exact same phrase that's used here in Galatians. And not according to Christ. There are at least three major interpretive options for these elemental spirits and what they are. The first is that maybe they're sort of like basic principles. Like there's like an intellectual category that this could be read through. And these are sort of basic principles about the way the world works Maybe in the context of the ancient world, Paul's saying that these elemental spirits are sort of zodiac signs or planets, like foundational elements of the world that somehow we live under them and they shape our lives in certain ways. A third way is to talk about this through a spiritual category and to say that there are spirits in the world that are sort of working for the world's agendas in our lives and we're enslaved under them. Without needing to choose one of those three, it's clear that Paul is talking about something foundational that we just sort of wake up to in the world and then struggle against as we live our lives. Whether it's like intellectual or whether it's elemental or whether it's spiritual, they're things that are foundational about the world. And then they begin to govern the way that we think about ourselves, the way that we talk about ourselves as we go. And certainly, once we begin to live under the identity of I am the things I don't currently have that I will hopefully have in the future, we can fall into, in an elemental way, the world works from a standpoint of a belief system about how we think about ourselves about that. As we become overwhelmed with an identity of the things that we don't have, we can begin to believe things about ourselves that sort of say, we don't have the things we want in life because something's wrong with me. Or I did something wrong. Or I missed something. Or I'm not ready. Maybe those people got what they wanted because they did all the preparation, they did all the work, and they're ready, and there's something lacking in what I did. And we begin to live under that in a profoundly condemning way. And I think it's fair to actually say that that is sort of an elemental way that the world works, and the world thinks. Because the world is always telling us, it's an elemental aspect of the world to tell us that we don't have something that we wanted because of something that we did wrong. That's just like the baseline of what the world has to offer when we look at lack in our lives. You missed something. You did something wrong. Those people over there that got it, they did everything right, and you did things wrong. Isn't that the foundational, elemental way that the world works? That we think about the world, that we think about ourselves, that we think about other people? This does become an enslavement. Because an identity about all the things that we don't have becomes reinforced by a belief system that says to us over and over again, you don't have the things that you wanted because you got something wrong. And it's really hard to get out of that. These two things put together, identity and beliefs about ourselves and about the world that are caught up and defined by all the things that we don't have, result in stolen time. Our lives become stopped in time around something that we didn't get or something that we don't have yet. And we begin to live in relationship to the future as prisoners of a hoped-for future. We begin to live in a desperate relationship with all the things that we hope will come to pass, and the present just begins to pass us by. There's pain in all of these things. Pain of an identity defined by things that come to pass. There's pain in our beliefs when we tell us we're not ready, we didn't earn it, we got something wrong. And then there's pain of loss in the present because we are imprisoned and broken in our access to live life now because we are imprisoned by this hypothetical future that we hope comes to pass. And this can be like challenging enough in our own lives. And everyone here knows some sort of pain or something that they were hoping that would come to pass in their life that either maybe isn't going to come to pass or just hasn't come to pass yet. And we are full of grief and pain and challenge about that. That's hard enough to wrestle through on our own. But then like when we walk into the presence of other people, and that's on display in front of others, that is really, really painful and really shameful. Because when you walk into a room, the way that human, worldly rooms work, we're constantly looking around the room and saying, who got what they wanted and who didn't? And so who gets to walk into their room with their head held high, and who has to walk into the room feeling like my life is on display? And that becomes a really painful way to live. When we're constantly in the presence of all the things that it seems like other people got, And yet we have to wrestle out in front of other people the ways that our lives are lacking. You know, life is unfair in this regard. It just seems to be a reality that some people get all sorts of stuff and other people don't. And it's one thing for that to be unfair, but it's another thing to be imprisoned in the condemnation of that feeling in front of others over and over and over and over. But it seems that it's the reality of this world that that's just how this works. There's no way around that according to the reality of this world. This is the way the world works. There's a time coming for everyone in life where we're not going to get something that we really want. Maybe some of us are there already. Maybe some of us are walking into that season. Maybe some of us, God bless you, can't even imagine that at this moment in your life. But oh, God help you, it's coming. It's coming. There's a day coming for everyone when something that we really wanted will not come to pass. And because the world works according to the logic of, well, you didn't get what you wanted, and so you failed, or you got something wrong, you are just doomed at that time in your life to be full of shame and condemnation in front of other people, in front of your coworkers, in front of your family members, in front of your friends, all of the things where people are going to look at you and go, something went wrong in your life because that thing that you hoped for didn't come to pass. And we've all been in conversation, right, about those sorts of things with the people who are like, well, why don't you just try what I tried? Right? We've all had that conversation. That was so helpful, wasn't it? It was so helpful. But this is just a cycle that we're doomed in over and over and over and over again in the world. Because the day's coming when we're not going to get that thing that we really dearly hope for. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but it's coming. And all the world has to offer you in that place is just the shame and condemnation of how your hoped-for future didn't become your lived present. And how bitter and painful it is to walk that out in front of other people. And if this were the only world that existed, that would be the end of the story. But this is not the only world that exists. There is another world. There's a world of God. A world of God, not a world that's built on these elemental principles of comparison and judgmentalism, and if you didn't get something, it's because you screwed up. All the things and logics that operate in our minds, and in our souls, and in our spirits, and our societies in the world. There's a world of God where we are first given an identity as people who were made to receive good things from God before we ever got anything in the first place. Where the order of our internal identity and the externality of what we have and have not received is reversed. Because according to this world, you get to walk into a room with your head held high once you've got all the external things that you set out to get. But in the world of God, God gives you the identity of someone who is made to receive good things before you actually get any of the good things. God gives you the identity first. And then out of that place, you are able to not be stuck in your present, trapped and imprisoned by a hypothetical future that may or may not ever come to pass, I don't know. But living in the present as someone who is open to receive from God whatever He has to give to you, because that is who He has made you to be. Amen. That is what God is saying through this text, and that is what Paul is fighting for when he's writing to the Galatians. He's fighting for them. He's warring for their identity. That they would stop looking at the externals in their life and start looking first at who God has made them to be. This is what Paul says to the Galatians. In chapter 4, verses 4 to 5, he says, "But when the fullness of time had come," when the fullness of time, God's time, not some oppressive, hypothetical, hope-for future that we have no control over. Not that kind of time. Not time that condemns us and makes us fearful and anxious, but full time and God's timing. When that arrived, when God brought it out of we began to live either as slaves or as wards. People whose identity are based on what we do or what we hope for is coming in the future. And Paul says, Jesus came to make you a child. Not a slave or someone governed by a legal category, but a child in the house of God, adopted into God's family. And if you are a child of God, Paul goes on to say, then you are an heir. This is what he says in chapter 4, verse 7. So you are no longer a slave by it, but a son, a child, and if a child, then an heir. And an heir is somebody whose identity it is now to receive before any of the future comes to pass. That's what an heir is. When you're a child of God, you're also an heir. Someone who has the identity of I receive from God because my Father is good to me and I'm a child in His house. Before any of the other stuff has or doesn't come to pass. And you know, if we lived as heirs, people who were settled in our identity as I was made to receive from God just because, that would give us the ability to walk into that room, whatever that room is for you, with your head held high, regardless of whatever the external things are. Because like, we all know rooms like that. I'm hoping everyone has a hypothetical room in their mind. Rooms where you walk in and you're just comparing who got the latest, greatest thing. You know, if you've been in a space like that, the external things that actually help people hold their heads high in those spaces, they're actually really fleeting, aren't they? You get like one meeting, maybe two, out of the last great thing that happened to you. And at the third time, nobody cares. It's like it didn't happen. You need a new thing all over again to be able to walk into that room and feel like, I'm a somebody. What if you just knew you were a somebody because God said you were? That you can walk in and your life's not blown about by what doesn't happen in your life. That would give you the strength. That's not ending. Because God's love for you and God's call for you and the belonging that you have in Him is not ending. You know, God is so kind. God doesn't just speak these things to us. He witnesses their reality to us by the Holy Spirit. Paul says this in this text. In this text, Paul says, like, do you doubt that this good news could possibly be true for you? God has sent the Spirit to testify internally to yourself that this is true. You know, let me just ask you, right, when you think about people, do people belong? Should a person belong? I mean, the feeling of belonging in our lives is so foundational, so important. Should a person belong because of who they are or because of what they have and haven't accomplished? Because of who they are. That's why people should belong. I'm assuming that everyone just knee-jerk has that answer. If I may phrase the question, should you belong? Based on who you are, what you have and haven't done, then some of us are maybe like, well, I'm actually, right, that harsh critic voice, that actually we like kind of like it for some reason. That's why it stays there for forever. That's why the truth of God has such a hard time getting in. Because we just want so badly to be able to say, I did it. These are all the things I did. I wanted that stuff in the future, and I had my 13-step plan, and boom, I accomplished it. But when we think about other people, we're full of grace and truth, and we go, people should belong because they're people. Not because of whatever they got right or wrong. You know, why do we think that? Why does that come so instinctively to us? Is it because it's obvious? Like, really, when you think about the world, is that obvious? Is it as obvious intellectually as it is in your soul and in your heart when you hear that question? I think no. There are all sorts of questions and opinions that people can have about that. What makes someone belong? But we instinctively know that a person should belong because they're a person. What if that's not instinctively? What if that is something that God told us one time? A long time ago, the Holy Spirit whispered to us a truth that we just barely remember in the right context. The Holy Spirit whispered to us one day and said, God loves all people. And all people are made in the image of God. And so even though at times when it doesn't make sense, our hearts leap up at the idea that people need a home because they're people. Maybe that's not something we know instinctively. Maybe that's something the Holy Spirit witnesses to us. Because God is powerful to witness to the truth. That's what the Bible says. In Galatians chapter 4, verse 6, Paul says, and because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of His Son into your hearts crying, Abba, Father. That God, because we are children somewhere, and all the mess, and all the muck, and all the migrant, all the deafening noise, and all the things that we can't see, somehow, the whisper of the Holy Spirit that you are a child of God and you get to call God Father. That's in there. You remember it when you hear it. And everybody does. When they hear you belong because you're a child of God, they remember. And if you're a child, you're an heir. Someone in whose it is a matter of their identity that they are made to receive, even before certain things come to pass. The Holy Spirit witnesses this to the Galatians in this text. It witnesses this to us today. Whatever we have gotten in life and whatever we are still waiting on, our identity is not built on the externals of what we have and haven't received. It is built on the fact that through Jesus Christ, we belong as His child. And so it's in our very being to receive from Him. And while it is a mystery in the purposes and plans of God, why some people receive things, and God help us understand why other people do not. God has called us in error, and that He wants to give you good things is not a mystery. It's not up for doubt. When we believe this witness and receive this witness before our Heavenly Father, we learn that our life is not meant to be spent in anxious pining over a desperate future and shame in our present. But when we begin to walk into the room knowing that we are heirs, God made me to give me good gifts. Our present turns into confidence and our future turns into hope. This is what God has for you because you are a child of God and He loves you.